Between the Indian and Pacific Oceans lies the Malay archipelago, home to the 25,000 islands that make up Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, the southern Philippines, and Brunei. Traditionally called Nusantara, this region was once home to great medieval maritime empires such as Srivijaya and Majapahit, which controlled the South China Sea. For more than 2,000 years, ships travelling from India to China have had to sail through the stormy waters of Nusantara, braving some of the most tempestuous seas in the world. Even today, 1/3 of all the world's shipping passes through the South China Sea. Before modern shipping, the journey across the Indian Ocean and through the South China Sea was far more dangerous than it is today. In the waters of Indonesia alone, almost 500 shipwrecks have been excavated, and more than 2,000 others are still lying under the sea, their stories waiting to be uncovered. Interasia, the history of interactions within Asia and beyond. Indonesia's Belitung Island, located in the Java Sea between the larger islands of Sumatra and Java, is a popular holiday destination today. With its pristine beaches and captivating granite formations, tourists flock to the island for luxury beachfront resorts and snorkeling tours. But beneath the waters surrounding Belitung, however, lay a sunken Arab ship that remained hidden for 1,200 years since its sinking in the first quarter of the 9th century AD. Making its voyage around the year 830 AD, it carried gold and silver, about 70,000 pieces of fine ceramics, spices, as well as assorted other precious goods, all of them the finest examples of the artistry and splendor of Tang Dynasty China. Had the ship not sunk, these precious items would have found a home in Baghdad, one of the greatest cities of the time, and in the other great cities of the Abbasid Caliphate. This was a shipwreck unlike any other. The Belitung story begins in the year 1998, a year after the Asian financial crisis hit, and just a few months after the toppling of Suharto's 30-year authoritarian regime in Indonesia. Amidst economic and political turmoil, some fishermen in the Belitung area strayed further from their usual grounds in a desperate search for sea cucumbers. They found themselves around the Batu Hitam reefs, 1.6 kilometers off Belitung Island and 17 meters underwater. There, they stumbled upon ceramic plates and bowls embedded in the seabed. Suspecting these might be worth something, they collected a few of these ceramics, which very quickly made their way to the antiques market in Jakarta and then to museums all over the world. Museum curators, antiques experts, archaeologists and historians were all astounded. In their hands were ceramics from the Tang Dynasty, in such perfect condition as never before seen. Very soon after, the entire wreck was sold to Seabed Explorations, the company that was to excavate the site. Excavation of the site was completed in 2 seasons. The first took place in September and October 1998, and the second between April and June 1999. During the first season, the crew excavated 2/3 of all the ceramics on the ship. This revealed the ship itself, which had been buried under the cargo. What they had unearthed was a surprise. Archaeologists had expected that the ship would be of Southeast Asian or Chinese origin, but instead discovered an 18-meter-long vessel that must have come from either the western coast of India or Arabia. This Belitung ship would turn out to be the first ancient Arab vessel ever discovered. The first and biggest clue as to the origin of the ship was its construction. It had no nails. This was a sewn boat, meaning that its planks were sewn together using ropes of coconut fiber. This was a technique famously used in India and the Middle East since the centuries before Christ. As early as the 2nd century AD, the Greek navigational logbook, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, described the stitched ships used in Oman and other parts of Arabia. Sailing through the mouth of the Gulf, after a 6 days course, there is another market town of Persia called Omana. To both of these market towns, large vessels are regularly sent from Bari Gaza, loaded with copper and sandalwood, and timbers of teakwood, and logs of blackwood and ebony. To Omana, frankincense is also brought from Cana, and from Omana to Arabia, boats sewed together after the fashion of the place. These are known as madarata. Depictions of sewn boats are littered throughout archaeological sites and ancient manuscripts from India and the Middle East. The most detailed of these is an 11th century Indian shipbuilding treatise known as the Yuktikal Pataru. The Yuktikal Pataru describes the dimensions and construction of sewn sea-going vessels called boita, which were used to cross the Indian Ocean into Southeast Asia. There is also a famous illustration found in a 12th century manuscript of an Arabic literary text, the Maqamat of Al-Hariri. This illustration depicts a sewn ship remarkably similar to the one discovered at Belitung. Also, these Arab ships are mentioned in the travels of Marco Polo. He says, "Their ships are wretched affairs, and many of them get lost, for they have no iron fastenings and are only stitched together with twine made from the husk of the Indian nut. They beat this nut until it becomes like horsehair, and from that they spin twine, and with this stitch the planks of the ships together. It keeps well and is not corroded by the sea water, but it will not stand well in a storm. Hence, 'tis a perilous business to go on a voyage in one of these ships, and many of them are lost, for in that sea of India the storms are often terrible." Archaeologists initially had trouble determining whether the Belitung ship was of Indian or Arab origin, so they sent timber samples from its planks for lab testing. Most of the timber, it turned out, came from East Africa, the traditional source for Arab ships. Indian ships, on the other hand, would have used higher quality timber from South Asia. Furthermore, the Belitung ship was remarkably similar to Arab ships known as dhows. These were once used throughout the Arab world, but have mostly been replaced by modern ships. But they can still be found in the Sultanate of Oman, a country that was a regional maritime power for 2 millennia, until it chose to isolate itself in the first half of the 20th century. Located at the entrance to the Persian Gulf, Oman was, in ancient times, a major trading post and a center for shipbuilding. By the 1970s, traditional Omani sewn dhows had been reduced from transoceanic vessels to fishing boats, but still resembled the ocean liners of medieval Arab times. The discovery of an Abbasid-era ship in Indonesia, with a cargo full of Chinese goods, meant that the Arab vessels had succeeded in traveling all the way from the Persian Gulf to China. This proved that Arab ships, unlike previously believed, were strong enough to withstand the entire journey despite having no nails. The construction of the Belitung ship also showed that it was repaired in Southeast Asian ports, suggesting that shipbuilding expertise was available across the Indian Ocean. Arab merchants of the 9th century could, indeed, sail directly to China to procure their wares instead of having to rely on agents and resellers closer to home. To demonstrate that Arab sewn boats could make the long voyage, the Omani government announced in the year 2006 that it would build a replica of the Belitung ship and sail it all the way to Singapore. As far as possible, the ship would be built using the same materials and techniques as the original Belitung ship. The sailors would navigate the Indian Ocean using traditional Arab techniques and would eat, live, and work in the manner of 9th century sailors. This ship would be named the Jewel of Muscat. The Jewel of Muscat would be Oman's second zone boat to cross the Indian Ocean. In 1980, Oman had already built a ship named Sohar for British explorer Tim Severin. This was the so-called Sinbad ship and was based on the ship used by Sinbad the Sailor, the beloved hero from the Arabian Nights, on his 7 voyages. In fact, legend has it that Sinbad was based on an actual figure in Arabian folklore who was born in the town of Sohar, Oman. Sinbad lived during the reign of the Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid between the 8th and 9th centuries, the same era as the Belitung ship. He too travelled all the way to Southeast Asia and China on a ship stitched together by coconut fibre. The replica of the Sinbad ship was completed in 7 months. It was then handed over to Tim Severin and his crew of 25 men, who set sail from Oman on the 21st of November 1980, their destination, China. Their route was probably the same as the Belitung ship, across the Arabian Sea to India, around the tip of Sri Lanka, across the Indian Ocean, through the Straits of Malacca, and then to Guangzhou, China. The Sinbad ship completed the journey successfully over 8 months, reaching Guangzhou on the 1st of July 1981. It is now on display at the Al Bustan roundabout in Muscat, Oman. The ship's journey was a remarkable feat, but it was based entirely on myth and folklore, without any evidence that these voyages actually occurred. The Belitung wreck, with a real ship and real cargo, showed that Sinbad's voyages weren't just fiction. They were, in essence, based on real voyages that took place in the 9th century. The Jewel of Muscat would show the world the ship that Sinbad actually sailed. Construction of the Jewel began in the year 2008, led by maritime archaeologist Dr. Tom Vosmer. The team building the ship was multinational, drawn from 5 countries, including local Omanis. In charge of shipbuilding was Indian shipwright Babu Sankaran, who brought along with him a team from Kerala on India's west coast, a region which also used, built and sold sewn boats. Incidentally, Babu Sankaran and his team are now working on the first reconstruction of an Indian sewn boat, which is set to sail from Orissa in India to Southeast Asia in the year 2025. Like the Jewel, the original Belitung ship was also an international affair. The materials used for the ship were sourced from various places along the Indian Ocean. For example, most of its timber came from East Africa, with some from India, and the coconut fiber probably came either from the Maldives or somewhere else in South Asia. We also know that the original Belitung ship was sent for repairs in Southeast Asia, where its anchor was replaced and some parts of the ship were restitched. To preserve historical accuracy, the team behind the Jewel of Muscat scoured the globe to find the same materials. To build the hull, they needed timber made of African mahogany, which is now scarce. The team had to venture to West Africa, where they eventually found the wood from the forests of Ghana. Then, to learn how to make a similar coconut fiber, they traveled to Zanzibar in Tanzania, which was once a center for shipworthy coconut fiber. Lastly, the hull was made waterproof by applying shark liver oil, an ancient technique still used in Oman a few decades ago. After a year of intensive work on the ship, the Jewel of Muscat officially set sail on the 16th of February 2010. Helming the Jewel was Omani captain Saleh Said Al-Jabri. The ship was to sail across the Arabian Sea to Kochi on India's southwestern coast, then to Gull in Sri Lanka, and from there cross the Indian Ocean to Penang, Malaysia. Then, on the final leg of its journey, it would sail through the congested Straits of Malacca, stopping at Port Klang before arriving at its final destination, Singapore. Captain Saleh and his crew would navigate the seas using ancient tools such as the kamal, which was devised by Arab navigators in the 9th century. Modern technology would also be available to support the crew in trying to understand and utilize these forgotten ancient techniques. And like the crew of the original Belitung ship, the sailors of the Jewel would sleep cramped together on the deck and eat either easy-to-cook communal meals or dry rations, depending on the situation. The Jewel's journey turned out to be an unforgettable adventure, with the ship and her crew finding themselves in perilous situations on multiple occasions. The first occurred 2,000 kilometers and 20 days into the Arabian Sea, where the crew found themselves stranded in an area with little to no wind, unable to make any progress for days. In the still air and intense heat, they became restless. Their store of food began to rot. If the ship didn't start moving soon, they might soon starve. As a last resort, Captain Saleh radioed for help from the Indian Coast Guard, who helped to tow the ship to Kochi, its first port of call, where the ship could be cleaned and serviced. From Kochi, the Jewel headed to Galle in Sri Lanka, 600 kilometers away. 4 days into the journey, stormy weather caused the ship's mast to split. The masts needed to be replaced immediately, leading to a hurried search for the right timber in the forests of Sri Lanka. Following weeks of delays, the Jewel set off 10 days after the beginning of monsoon season. The crew were nervous. They were about to face unpredictable weather conditions and waves of up to 5 meters high. Storms hit the ship soon after they left the port of Galle, making it impossible for the crew to enjoy hot, freshly cooked meals and forcing them to survive on cold sandwiches and dry rations. Then, the crew received news of a cyclone heading in their direction, with no way to avoid it. They were soon faced with winds blowing at almost 100 kilometers per hour. With his skill acquired from decades of experience, Captain Saleh managed to outrun the wind, but the ship did not escape unscathed. With its stitching coming loose, leaks began to appear which rapidly filled the ship with water, and the ship could only be kept afloat by continuous bailing by the crew. A brief respite of calm weather followed, only for the ship to face thunderstorms again 14 days into their journey from Galle. After 19 days at sea, the crew finally arrived at Penang. Following a short rest, the Jewel departed for the final leg of its journey through the Straits of Malacca, reaching Singapore on the 3rd of July 2010. While the Jewel's journey began in Muscat and ended in Singapore, the original Belitung ship probably began its journey from one of the great 9th century ports of the Persian Gulf, such as Basra or Siraf. Then, it would have crossed the Arabian Sea, stopping either at Kollam on India's west coast or Galle at Sri Lanka. From there, it would have crossed the Bay of Bengal to reach Sumatra, stopping at Aceh before entering the Straits of Malacca. Then, it would have made its way up the South China Sea to the southern Chinese port of Guangzhou. Along the way, it might have veered slightly off course to stop at various other ports. The Belitung ship also probably made a secondary journey from Guangzhou to the port of Yangzhou, where it loaded most of its cargo. Later, on its way back, it veered off course again, leading it to the Java Sea, where it eventually crashed near Belitung Island. Whether it was headed to another port or was forced off course by a storm remains a mystery. When the Belitung ship made its voyage in the 9th century, this was already a well-established route. This long route from the Persian Gulf to China linked together several shorter routes which ships had already been plying for 1,000 years. The Indian Ocean trade began in the years before Christ, when sailors began learning to use the monsoons to propel their ships across the ocean. Early written records of the Indian Ocean trade include the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, as well as, from the Roman Empire, Pliny the Elder's Natural History. In the early years before Christ, the Indian Ocean trade consisted, broadly, of two main spheres. The Western Indian Ocean saw ships plying between the western coast of India, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and the eastern coast of Africa. From there, ships made their way to the Mediterranean, connecting the Greco-Roman world with India. The Eastern Indian Ocean, on the other hand, linked India with Southeast Asia and across the South China Sea to East Asia. The links between Southeast Asia and the Eastern Indian states such as Tamil Nadu and Odisha especially grew to such importance that to this day, the city of Cuttack in Odisha celebrates a festival called Bali Yatra. Literally meaning the journey to Bali, this festival commemorates the voyages taken from the ancient empire of Kalinga to the islands of Indonesia. Over the first millennium, these trade routes would become increasingly connected to form one long route, bringing Indian shells to Egypt and China, Roman coins to Southeast Asia, Arabian frankincense to China, Southeast Asian spices to Persia, and Chinese silk to Europe. Culturally, the Indian Ocean facilitated the spread of Hinduism and Buddhism from India to the east. The Malay archipelago began to adopt Hinduism and Buddhism, adapting these Indian religions to their local customs and beliefs. By the middle of the first millennium, the great maritime empire of Srivijaya, with its capital at Palembang in Sumatra, had become both an important maritime power and also a center for Buddhist learning. In the year 687, on his way back from India, the Chinese monk Yi Jing visited Palembang, where many Chinese monks stopped for preliminary studies in Buddhism before heading to Nalanda University in India, the preeminent Buddhist center of the time. Also by the 7th century, the new religion of Islam had already made its way from Arabia to China. In fact, the first mosque in China is said to have been built in the year 627 during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad. This mosque, known as the Huaisheng Mosque, still stands today in its original location in Guangzhou, a city that is still an important international port today. By the year 627, when the Huaisheng Mosque was built, the Arabs were already seasoned sailors, having served as middlemen in both the land and sea trade between Asia and Europe. At the same time, the Persians had well-established trade and diplomatic relations with China, with the Sassanid Empire having dispatched regular embassies over the centuries. From the 7th to the 8th centuries, the Arab tribes, united by Islam, conquered the Persian Sassanid Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, and Egypt, incorporating the people and knowledge from these great civilizations into their fold. These ancient civilizations would contribute to an Islamic golden age that began when the Abbasid Caliphate was established in the year 750. The Abbasid Caliphate encouraged the acquisition and spread of knowledge, and there was a flourishing of science, art, and commerce throughout the empire, especially in Baghdad. There grew a thirst for exotic goods and fine wares among the wealthy citizens of the Abbasid Caliphate, and great riches to be made for anyone who dared to venture to faraway lands to acquire them. Around this time, Chinese civilization was also experiencing its golden age under the Tang Dynasty, which was founded in the year 618. It was during this time that China became truly cosmopolitan and open, so open, in fact, that erstwhile rulers from the fallen Sassanid Empire sought refuge in China and formed a government in exile there. The Tang Dynasty reopened the land-based Silk Road that led from its capital Chang'an in present-day Xi'an across Central Asia and to the Middle East and Europe, thereby becoming one of the wealthiest empires in the world. Chinese goods such as silk and ceramics became coveted across the Indian Ocean world, including in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Port cities such as Guangzhou and Yangzhou began to house enclaves of foreign traders whose demand for Chinese goods was met by Chinese efficiency in manufacturing and logistics. The trade was so lucrative that, in spite of a bloody massacre of Arabs and Persians in Yangzhou in the year 760, it was soon business as usual again for these Middle Eastern merchants. On an official level, the Tang Dynasty and the Abbasid Caliphate established diplomatic relations very soon after the founding of the Caliphate in the year 750. Just a year later, in the year 751, the armies of the two empires clashed along the river Talas in Kyrgyzstan in a military confrontation known as the Battle of Talas. The Abbasid Caliphate, having allied with the Tibetans and also having succeeded in making Tang mercenaries defect, eventually won the battle. Some say that the meeting of these two armies led to the spread of paper and paper-making technology from China to the Middle East. In the year 752, the Abbasids began sending regular embassies to Chang'an, and the relationship between the two empires became one of peaceful trade. This led to an influx of Chinese goods into Abbasid territories via the traditional Silk Road and, of course, via the Indian Ocean. By the latter half of the 8th century, China's maritime trade had begun to surpass its overland trade. A major catalyst for this shift was the Anlu Shan Rebellion, a disastrous civil war that took place between the year 755 and the year 763. The rebellion nearly ended the Tang Dynasty, and although the dynasty managed to survive, it never recovered from then on until its eventual collapse in the year 907. China's western regions continued to be mired in turmoil and instability, disrupting trade along the overland Silk Road. Suddenly, the perilous Indian Ocean trade routes became the safer option. And as Middle Eastern demand for Chinese goods grew, merchants needed an alternative to camels and other beasts of burden in order to carry large quantities of bulky items such as ceramics and metalware. By the 9th century, the Chinese had established a manufacturing and logistics supply chain for goods intended for maritime trade. As early as 714 AD, when the Indian Ocean trade began to rise in prominence, the Tang government had appointed a maritime shipping superintendent in Guangzhou, the main Chinese port of call for foreign vessels and traders. Much like today, the Guangzhou office handled matters of customs and duties, licenses, and other administrative issues relating to the import-export trade. The maritime shipping superintendent was also in charge of receiving the tributes sent to the Tang court via the maritime route. Other ports, such as Hangzhou and Mingzhou, located further north, were also prominent ports of call for international trade. The Belitung ship must have stopped at Guangzhou, as all foreign vessels were required to do so. It is likely that it later sailed further up to Yangzhou, a river port northwest of present-day Shanghai. During this time, Yangzhou was a key domestic port along a subsection of the Grand Canal, a giant artificial waterway connecting the rivers of northern and eastern China. The Grand Canal, completed in the year 609 AD, allowed goods to be easily transported from one region of China to another. It was along the Grand Canal that goods from northern China traveled on their way to the Belitung ship, including 60,000 pieces of ceramics. 57,000 of these were produced in the inland region of Changsha in present-day Hunan province. These 57,000 ceramics, known as Changsha bowls or Changsha wares, were manufactured in the 6 major regional sites capable of supporting large-scale production. These bowls, identifiable by their brown glaze, were mass-produced and yet still handmade and one of a kind. No two bowls were alike. They were then stacked on top of each other and tied securely together, and some were later stored in large urns made in Guangzhou. Like many other items found in the Belitung wreck, these changsha bowls were probably custom-made for international markets, particularly the Western Indian Ocean region. Some bowls have designs on them that resemble Arabic calligraphy but are completely meaningless. This is a style known as Pseudo-Arabic that was popular in Abbasid Baghdad. Other bowls depict geometric motifs, pictures of animals, and various other designs. Some of the changsha ceramics have actual writing on them, which provide important clues as to the dates of the Belitung wreck. The most significant of these is an inscription that reads 16th day, 7th month, 2nd year of the Qingzong reign, which, in our calendar, translates to 16 July 826. Other writings are more literary. One especially poignant piece is a poem that reads, "The lonely goose has flown to the far southern skies, and the cold wind startles one with mournful whispers. The maiden pines for that guest from beyond the river, who sooner or later will come back to cross the frontier." Another bowl simply states, "The bowl is from the famous Fan family shop in the folk market of Hunan province." Wealthy Abbasid citizens had also developed a taste for extremely high-end luxury Chinese ceramics, of which over 500 were on the Belitung ship. There were smooth, white, stoneware utensils from northern China, in a style popular among the Tang Dynasty elite, along with green-splashed ceramics with complex designs that were specially made for the Middle Eastern market. These included a water pitcher that was almost 2 meters high, fashioned after the design of Persian metal water pitchers. The Belitung wreck also gives us the very first examples of the blue and white porcelain that is so popular among collectors today, which is usually associated with the Ming Dynasty founded some 500 years later. These first blue and whites were probably imitations of Abbasid-style blue and white ceramics. They were crude and clearly made by potters who did not have experience working with cobalt, the blue pigment used in these ceramics. The wreck also contained 66 lavish gold and silver items never before found among Chinese treasure loots, as the use and trade of gold and silver were highly regulated in the Tang Dynasty. Gold and silver were meant only for formal government-to-government exchanges or for royal occasions. Nobody knows why they were aboard the Belitung ship. One extraordinary cup, made of pure gold, stands out in particular, being only one of 3 such cups ever found, and the only one found outside of China. Along with the cup, the Belitung wreck contains ornate gold and silver plates, jewelry boxes, and other decorative items that were perhaps meant to be presented as official gifts to the Srivijaya court. The Belitung wreck also tells us a little about how the crew of the Belitung ship lived while they were out at sea. They had a mortar and pestle for grinding spices, and a rolling pin for dough. They used fishing nets out at sea and stored fresh water in large jars acquired from the Middle East. They went shopping at the ports they stopped at, picking up other smaller items along the way, such as little games of dice to keep themselves entertained. There was also a Chinese ink slab used for writing, something only a literate Chinese man would have, suggesting that the ship also carried passengers. But what became of the crew will always be a mystery. Perhaps they perished along with their ship, but no human remains have been found. Perhaps they got lucky and managed to swim to the shores of Belitung Island, 1.6 kilometers away. After the discovery of the Belitung wreck in 1999, A second Western Indian Ocean sewn boat was found in Thailand in 2013 at a location known as Panom Surin. This ship is larger than the Belitung ship, but similar in every other way. Unlike the Belitung wreck, very few pieces of cargo have been recovered, and those that have been found are a mix of Southeast Asian, Middle Eastern, and Chinese artifacts. After excavation, the entire cargo of the Belitung wreck was purchased by the Singapore government in the year 2005 for about $32 million. Some of it is now on permanent display at the Asian Civilizations Museum in Singapore, in a dedicated gallery known as the Tang Shipwreck.